Now moving on to the speakers for today. First, we have Bindia Vakil. Bindia is accredited with developing the market for supply chain risk management solutions when she founded Resilinc. She holds a patent for evaluating and presenting the supply chain vulnerability and risk of an enterprise. Bindia is a published author and frequent speaker at top supply chain conferences and universities on the topic of supply chain resiliency. Next, we have Kathy Fulton. Kathy Fulton is Executive Director for American Logistics Aid Network. She leads the organization in coordinating information and logistics resources to efficiently deliver humanitarian aid. And next, we have Jared Gensel. Jared Gensel is founder and director of the MIT Humanitarian Supply Chain Lab in the MIT Center for Transportation and Logistics. Dr. Gensel leads fieldwork in the range of contexts to develop insights that improve response efforts during emergencies and strengthen supply chain in vulnerable communities. Thank you to our speakers, and now I will hand it over to Bindia.
Good morning and good evening, everyone. Thank you for your time, and also thank you to Jared and Kathy for joining us today. We'll jump right in. As we do not have a moment to waste, we are all here because of the events unfolding quickly across China as the coronavirus spreads exponentially. And as we all watch, the news is concerning and the cases are spreading worldwide. Of particular concern is the fact that, the virus right now can infect before symptoms appear. And that obviously means that aggressive isolation and lockdown methods are unfortunately necessary so that the infection can be contained. Obviously, this is very disruptive at a humanitarian level because supplies and shortages of essential goods are already being experienced in the lockdown zone, and our hearts go out to the people of China during these very, very difficult times. The Chinese government has taken these aggressive measures to contain it and to prevent the infections from spreading to the rest of the world. So obviously, anytime that a region gets cut off in today's world, our supply chains get affected. Now, our audience on this call today is primarily comprised of procurement executives and experts. And so our jobs require us to keep parts flowing, to keep supply chains running. And so therefore, our focus on today's call will really be on operational and supply chain disruptions and necessary response. Now, the timing of this event has been during the Chinese New Year week, which means people have been traveling en masse to visit their families all across China, and obviously not showing symptoms, not realizing they might be infectious. And so we're seeing a lot of cases across China, and also over 17 countries are reporting cases right now. Obviously, the heaviest concentration is in Wuhan and surrounding areas, and the Chinese government locked down those regions within days of the infection being identified and being understood. Across China, what we're seeing is the government has extended the Chinese New Year shutdown to February 2nd. Unverified, and I repeat, unverified information from local sources is that this could potentially go to February 11th. Many of the businesses we are hearing in the news and reports are closing down China operations temporarily until there's some resolution to what is going on right now. Many companies in the high-tech industry, I know we certainly are used to preparing for Chinese New Year. We have build-ahead plans. That go into effect months in advance, and we tend to get product shipped out early, anticipating about a 1-week shutdown and then a subsequent 1 to 2 week ramp. Okay, so given that this shutdown will now extend additional 2 weeks to February 2nd, this will certainly strain our build-ahead inventories that we are generally planning for. Hong Kong has restricted border travel from China. There have been rumblings yesterday from the US about potentially canceling all flights. from China. This morning, we heard British Airways has already canceled all flights and more airlines are expected to follow. Obviously, that would affect transportation logistics, as a lot of the airplanes nowadays carry tons of cargo. And so this is definitely going to be broader economic impact over the next few weeks. And we do see that the stock market has begun reflecting the impact to company financials. The markets have begun adjusting expectations and begun factoring in some large-scale disruptions. So in short, we expect the next 3 to 6 months will be fairly challenging for supply chain practitioners. In the near term, we will see the inventories tied many of us through a few weeks. However, 2 to 4 weeks hence, we will begin experiencing some allocations, extended lead times, decommits, and cancellations from our suppliers. Shortly after that, if the lockdown is not lifted, if the shutdown continues past February 11th, then we do expect to see some real and widespread shortages, and also expect several factories to experience downtime and allocations worldwide. Resilinc has mapped over 280 sites in the Hubei region itself. Predominantly, this region serves the high-tech industry. We are most concerned about our customers in this sector. Many of the supplier sites are also sub-tier supplier sites, not only to the high-tech industry, but also other industries like medical devices, automotive, industrial, and heavy. And so we do expect to see some kind of a ripple effect over time as the inventory levels across the tiers that will provide some level of protection initially start to whittle down. We'll have customers who have visibility into their sub-tier suppliers, and so they have already begun triangulating which tier 2s are affecting their tier 1s across the world, and our customers who have the sub-tier visibility have already begun acting to secure inventory and capacity wherever possible and available. And so I think this mapping the supply chain and having this information does provide earlier the ability to respond in a very coordinated and very targeted fashion. We are seeing across the Resilinc supplier network, as you know, we ask suppliers to confirm impacted, not impacted, and duration. And several suppliers have begun confirming impact to our customers. For the life science industry, particularly, we see chemicals, other items like glass, aluminum, and some other products that do originate from these parts of China. But quite frankly, our research does show that many of these companies that are in this region make chemicals and derivatives that have applications into other industries, certainly like electronics and others as well. A little bit about Wuhan. The region has a GDP of 213 billion in 2018, and according to Bloomberg, actually, that was larger than the economy of New Zealand. Wuhan happens to be a major transportation and manufacturing hub. It is vitally, economically very important to the Chinese economy and very well connected into the global supply chain. Wuhan has been moving into the higher end technology manufacturing areas, all the way from chip making to biomedical devices. Over 230 of Fortune 500 firms have invested in the Wuhan region, according to a 2019 report by the Milken Institute. And the central and local governments have also heavily invested in high-tech industries, particularly optoelectronics, semiconductor, etc. As a matter of fact, China's most advanced chip manufacturing plants for 3D NAND flash is based in Wuhan, owned by Tsinghua Uni Group. NAND flash memory has applications in smartphones, computers, and other electronic devices. Also, Yangtze Memory Technologies, and some of you may know XMC is a wholly owned subsidiary of Yangtze, as well as Wuhan Xixin Semiconductor Manufacturing. These are actually Chinese competitors to some well-known US memory manufacturers like WD, Micron, etc. So some of these companies are based there. So in short, NAND flash memory is expected to have some capacity constraints. Some other notable manufacturers in Wuhan, companies like Foxconn, Jabil, among others. And then the Wuhan and around the region around it has many other manufacturers. Obviously, we cannot disclose here, but obviously the information that Resilinc is sharing here is already in public domain. Specific supplier information is available to our mapping customers already in your various war rooms. So I think just given that this is such a critical region to our global supply chains, it's really important we make some plans for the coming weeks and months. So in order to do that, Resilinc did generate some pointers, and this was really based on our understanding and scenario projections that we did. So please just use these for planning purposes and make sure you make your own assumptions and adjustments before you use these. Having said that, we do believe the middle scenario seems most likely as of now and should definitely be used in your plans, in your planning assumptions. The first few days have shown this is growing fast and in certainly exponential growth we might call it that. The full spread numbers are not really available because of the shortage of test kits, so there is a chance that it is underreported. So therefore, we do advise our customers to plan for a 3 to 6 month disruption at this time. More clarity, we believe, will be available in the next 2 weeks as we all start to see more information about how patients who are currently infected begin to show recovery and how quickly they recover. What we saw with swine flu pandemic is that if recovery is consistently seen across the infected patients, then after the first few weeks, certainly we expect travel bans and advisories to get lifted. With a swine flu pandemic, once the recovery rates started to be consistently set, travel warnings to Mexico got downgraded, and within 3 months, we all moved on. Now, if recovery rates don't improve, fatalities grow, the government response, not only in China, but worldwide, will tighten. And so then we need to buckle up for a longer disruption. Our advice is to look for the next 2 numbers. Generally, it takes 6 to 9 months for a vaccine to be developed. It takes longer to get the scale of manufacturing that is needed to distribute at scale. So the next planning window is to prepare for a 6-month horizon. Obviously, given technology advances, speed and innovation rates, it is likely that vaccine could be accelerated. Australia has already indicated they have successfully grown the virus in a lab and begun work on developing, and multiple companies have begun work on developing a vaccine. Obviously, given China's manufacturing prowess and massive ability to mobilize at scale, it is likely that they could actually pull off manufacturing at scale in an emergency situation like this. And these things would obviously accelerate the recovery timeframes. Even as late as mid-January, when Resilinc was notifying, monitoring, and providing early updates to the coronavirus, it was really not so passé to talk about pandemic planning. I think the world in general has forgotten the last pandemic we had to live through. And so right now, our biggest concern is that many people are learning from scratch during this event. This event really highlights the need for continuous updating, testing of our business continuity as well as pandemic plans. And so depending on where you are in this maturity journey, you are likely to find that your experience will go anywhere from smooth to turbulent. And so if you're one of those companies that constantly prepare, hone, and test your business continuity and pandemic plans and train your people, you will find that you will require fewer heroics and save the day moments in the coming weeks. Your teams will know what to expect and what to do, and you will anticipate and protect better. I think all of us should use this opportunity to really kind of hone our plans and programs and really establish a robust business continuity and pandemic planning program in our companies. So let's not let this learning experience go to waste. Resilinc is really proud to be at the forefront of this with our customers. We have been staying on top of this event. As with all other events, trying to stay ahead of the rest of the world as it comes to supply chain response and mitigation. Best practice that we are seeing across our customer base is map, because you never know when the mapping and the supplier part site mapping data will be necessary in a situation like this. Identifying sub-tier suppliers, it is really vital at times like this, when at the drop of a hat, you can pull up and know exactly which of your suppliers or second-tier suppliers are in affected regions. And now you have the ability to go place risk buys in a very targeted way. So what we're seeing is that our customers, particularly in the high-tech industry, they have already launched our pandemic readiness surveys to hundreds of suppliers in the Hubei region. Many of them have already been collecting business continuity plans where suppliers do indicate their level of readiness for handling a pandemic. So please make sure you open up those BCPs and start reviewing which suppliers in Hubei have or do not have a robust pandemic plan. And so those are the suppliers that you should be really targeting on making sure you have sufficient inventory, sufficient capacity, or alternate sites or sources qualified. In addition to leveraging our research monitoring updates and supplier impact confirmations, we also recommend internally do the ongoing collaboration sessions within your various functions across different groups, and make sure that you all have the right trigger points that are in sync, so that at different trigger points you can activate various actions from your business continuity or pandemic plan. And don't forget to collaborate across enterprise risk, but also transportation, logistics, planning, and other customer-facing sales and account management functions, and ensure that you have a strong and robust communication strategy going to your leadership, all the way to the board level, as well as to the customers, and tight control over who says what outside your company. And lastly, but not the least, ensure that emergency funds and budget approval processes are activated and in place, so that you can quickly act and place risk buys when necessary to secure critical components right away. So with that, I'll hand it to Jared for a few minutes to speak. So Jared, welcome, and go ahead.
Thank you. My name is Jared Gensel from MIT. And MIT, in collaboration with the American Logistics Aid Network, Alan, often convene calls with the private sector to help facilitate coordination, and especially we have connections with the government to help facilitate information sharing between the government and private sector. And so we're very happy to join the Resilinc call, a community that's already been cultivated by people who are thinking further ahead about resilience in their supply chains and understanding this, and want to definitely provide a resource and support for helping coordinate with public and private sector information. I will start by talking a little bit about, we are trying to provide some assessments to the public sector so they can better understand the risks that might be at play that they need to be preparing for. And Kathy and I will kind of do a combined briefing talking about different aspects of things that we've been looking at, but we acknowledge up front that we are seeing only a partial picture, like all of us. And so the more information that we can share among each other in the private sector, the better the public sector can be setting up their plans appropriately. So I'm going to start by talking about one thing that we're diving into specifically is understanding freight transportation in China, and specifically initially around the Wuhan region that was initially set up in lockdown, understanding its role in the supply chain, and understanding its key role for river traffic as a transshipment node for much of the upstream trade on the Yangtze River belt, and have reports that operations were continuing, some delays, but I think the big caveat with that capacity and that transloading capability and shipment capability is that we are in this New Year period where flows will naturally be slower, and the real test of the capability of these important inland ports to move goods down the river is going to be tested coming forward. So I think we're a little bit of a wait and see in terms of that aspect, but we have done some preliminary analysis about the importance of those flows and what that any constraints at that node in the supply chain might further affect. And then obviously, reports today about further impact on air transport only causes there to be more concern about the nature of international transportation options for cargo. And so I think this is a very fluid moment and a very dynamic moment to assess what capabilities, how transportation capabilities will be affected going forward, and how much we all need to be planning differently around capacity and lead times for freight transportation coming out of China. And Kathy, I want to switch to a related topic. One of the things we really try to coordinate with the public sector on is naturally their role in public health response, and specifically around obtaining the equipment that's needed for the public health interventions. And so I do want to highlight that we are in communication with the federal government consolidated effort to address any supply chain issues that would affect the ability to provide protective equipment for medical workers and all of the related products that are needed to provide the appropriate public health interventions in this crisis. The federal government in the U.S. is monitoring this very closely, and there's a coordination effort that we are going to hopefully be able to provide that connection with the private sector. But there are opportunities for specifically those vendors in medical products supply chains to engage more directly, and we'll be happy to make those connections for anybody who would be interested. At the international level, there's also a coordination led by World Economic Forum, WFP, but really the spearhead of this is WHO, is convened this pandemic supply chain network. And they're, again, focused on the medical product supply chains primarily, and the ability to make sure that there's appropriate supply and that other allocation issues don't arise to cause there to be constraints in meeting the public health intervention needs. Related to that, there's a lot of good information out there around standards of what is protective equipment, what kinds of products are most critical. Those will change dynamically. For example, the WHO standards, they released another version on the 27th of January, version 2 already, around specs that are required. And we'll try to post information so that everyone on the call would be able to access that kind of information going forward. With that, I'll close out my part of the brief, and I'll transition to Kathy, who's been looking at the more of the supply chains specifically around these products.
Okay, thanks, Jared. And Kathy Fulton from the American Logistics Aid Network. So a lot of information is being thrown at you guys today, and I would be remiss if I didn't take a moment from a public health perspective and just remind everyone that your supply chain operations are run by people, so protection of your employees, and that starts with messaging and making sure that they are taking care of themselves properly. Hand washing is always the best way to help prevent the spread. But just taking care of that and helping your employees understand their risk or their lack thereof, depending on where they've been. So Jared teed me up to talk a little bit about the medical community and medical products. And so, based on the research that we've seen, we don't think that China is a large exporter of pharmaceuticals. We do know that there's a lot of production for internal usage, but not export. But they do produce and export a significant portion of medical consumables that are used worldwide. And so kind of that global impact for shipment to protect of the PPE, personal protective equipment, across the global landscape. We also know that from a supply and demand perspective, we expect that there's going to be a surge in demand globally for these types of materials, simply because of the wide media coverage and the lack of information that is available currently about the virus is changing constantly, and as always with any type of public health situation, that engenders fear with folks. And so making sure that, again, messaging to your employees to help them with that. I do want to switch gears just very quickly and talk a little bit about on kind of a couple of transportation things that I think Jared touched on, as far as the adjacent industries that may be affected by the disruptions in global transportation. So if there are components or byproducts that may be not directly in the affected areas, but because of the blanked sailing, so ships that are not moving, that would normally bring components that are not necessarily manufactured in the affected province, but elsewhere, that is also a concern, especially because of the geographic clustering of the industries manufacturing that happens in China. And then I think with that, I'm gonna pause, because I think the conversation around this from the attendees is probably a lot more important than anything else I could say at this point. So thanks.
Thank you, Kathy. At this time, we'd like to open it up to any questions from our attendees. So what I'm going to do is what you'll do is first you'll raise your hand using the raise hand icon within your WebEx, and then I will call your name and we will unmute you. Our first attendee that has a question is Shaylin Shah. Shaylin, do you have a question?
Hello.
Hello.
Yeah, actually the question is, along with the cities which are impacted or the manufacturing is, maybe we will, the question is, do we get notified whether logistics will also be impacted? Because currently we are not sure that whether the shipments have been moved or not. So we are not fully aware of what is the stand by the carriers like DHL, FedEx. We supply chain might have the daily shipments or the daily stuffs coming up from China with the help of these carriers. So are we going to be notified with the in the coming days that these are already these might be impacted?
So Shellen, I'll answer the question. So Resilinc monitors ports, airports, logistics nodes like DCs, warehouses, etc. We do notify our customers about disruptions to any of the locations in the affected area. Obviously, we do not provide shipment level visibility, as this data is not currently being shared in Resilinc by our customers.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, so we'll just give everyone else a moment to locate your raise hand icon so that you can also be unmuted.
So I think I have a question for Kathy. So Kathy, generally, when you talked about the medical consumables coming from China, and obviously we do have several hospitals on this call today. So can you talk about how the government assists or responds to the consumables issue?
I think I'm probably not the best person to talk in detail about that, but I can say, as Jared mentioned, that there is a huge task force looking at this, making sure that they do not disrupt the flows that are already in place. The medical community already has their procurement processes. Anything that would disrupt that from an additional buyer in the market is obviously something I know that the government wants to avoid. So that coordination is happening across the board at top levels.
Got it. And then just for the folks on the call from the healthcare industry, as many of you may be aware, Resilinc did start the Healthcare Transparency Initiative last year. And there is a specific conference call that we have scheduled for 10:30 Pacific tomorrow. So please try to join that call. We have participants who have confirmed they will be attending from the FDA, FEMA, and HHS and several other government agencies, obviously, in addition to Jared and Kathy speaking here today. So I think a lot of them are very interested in hearing what questions the private sector might have for the government agencies, as well as they themselves are interested in hearing about the response that folks like yourself on the call steps you might be taking to protect your supply chains. I think go ahead, Sophia, is there another
Okay,
question?
yeah, we have another question. His name is Lou Ferretti. Can we unmute Lou Ferretti, please? Hello, Lou. Do you have a question for one of the panelists? Lou Ferretti, you're on. We have unmuted you. Do you have a question for one of the panelists?
We aren't able to hear Lou. Abhinav, could you try again?
Yeah, I'm trying. He's on unmute.
Lou? Okay. So we had one other question from the audience here. Which is, have suppliers been, obviously many of our customers know that suppliers respond within Resilinc and confirm impact, and what was the duration that we are currently seeing across, the suppliers. So obviously we cannot share specific names of suppliers who have confirmed impact, nor can we tell you what duration there is. I can, however, tell you that in the high-tech industry, suppliers have begun confirming impact, and we are seeing that there are several sites that are confirming impact in Resilinc in the high-tech industry. So,
okay, we have another question that just came into the chat panel. Is it possible for the coronavirus to spread across the U.S.? How do we get ahead of it, and what are the best practices for preparedness?
Jared, do you want to try to answer that one?
Yeah, well, again, this is one of the key things is trying to enable the public health protocols to have and their interventions to have the most impact. I mean, the way to control an outbreak like this has been well studied and understood. It's a matter of having conformity to the messaging and so forth. So I'm glad that Kathy mentioned specifically for your workers and everything, proper protocols around hand washing and so forth, and individual measures are one of the most important ways to prevent the spread. So we'll try to, to the extent we can, provide that clearer guidelines on that. And if you don't have those, to make sure that, we're all doing what we can within our sphere of influence to encourage proper public practice. The other thing is, as we also alluded to, that the government at the national level in the U.S., and then like I mentioned at the international level through the WHO, is also trying to make sure that supply chains are able to deliver the equipment required to support those public health interventions, and to make sure that there's not going to be distorting behavior within the supply chains around over ordering and hoarding in areas where those products are not needed. So that coordination effort, I think, has improved over the years, and is one of the keys here. And so you and your supply chain community being able to plug in with that broader coordination effort to make sure that we're all aligning behaviors around prioritizing flows to where they're most needed, as guided by the public health officials who are more on track of how to manage the spread of a disease like this.
Thank you, Jared. We have another question that just came in. Can this virus travel through ports or shipments?
I'll jump on that too. And something I didn't mention on when I was talking about transportation and ports. I think it's important to highlight that in previous outbreaks like this, SARS, MERS, Ebola, ports have continued to operate in those situations. And the ports, in terms of like the virus, that's one of the more immediate things people think. Well, a shipment coming onto the ship right away will infect a sailor who then goes to another port and it spreads further. And so they do take proper protocols for that immediate stage in case there's any risk. But long term, these viruses do not survive on surfaces. And so I think that that's not something to be concerned over a long stage transit. And then again, following that, the public health guidance, and again, every virus is slightly different, and they're trying to understand the nature of this particular virus. But based on previous viruses, the ability to survive on a surface and parts, and shipments is not very long. And so I think that, again, following that public messaging from the public health officials will help us be able to know how to implement proper protocols in our supply chains. But that has been done fairly effectively, I think, in the past with regard to freight movements.
Okay, thank you, Jared. Lou, do we have you on the call now?
I think so. Can you hear me?
Oh, we can hear you now. Great. Do you have a question?
I just want to clarify, was there preferential treatment being given to medical device and or protective gear shipments?
So
this is, go ahead, Jared.
Go ahead, Kathy. You can take this as well as me.
I have seen reports that within Wuhan, the only road transport allowed has to do with medical and pharmaceutical shipments. I have not seen anything from a global scale regarding preferential treatment or anything like that. Jared, I don't know if you have any additional information.
No, I haven't seen that either. And I think mostly what the public sector tries to do in this case is help provide information so that there can be somewhat self-regulation about the importance of these things. They try to avoid putting overt controls in place. So.
I see. I'm just going to ask another question on the other question. How long can it survive on packaging or a part? Some of you might remember Fukushima. Many suppliers didn't want to take anything that was exposed to radiation at that time. And, there was research done as far as what level of radiation would be on a box or something that might have been in Narita. So a similar question, I know you answered it doesn't survive very long. What is very long? Is it 2 days, 24 hours, 48? Does weather, moisture, temperature have anything to do with that?
So these are all good questions. I think the first thing to say is that in a new virus, you always want to be cautious to try to extrapolate too much from the past. But in the past, a flu virus does not usually survive more than a day. I mean, and I don't remember the details, but this is a good thing for us to, we'll try to take some of these follow-ups and provide information back to Resilinc to share with the customer base on these good questions, because I don't want to answer out of hand. I want to try to get the most definitive information as the public health officials know it at this time.
Okay, thank you. I mean, this is a question that's being asked, at least in my world.
Yeah, it's a good question, and I'm glad it was raised so that we can find those definitive sources on this. So,
I mean, CDC has an answer. So I had looked that up, and they say it's unlikely, but they don't give any type of time dimension.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you, Lou. We do have a question that came in through the chat panel. This question is going to be for Bindia. Can you provide more intel on the January 30th presentation?
Yeah, so Charlie, I see that this question's from you, and I think Jennifer earlier also, Blair, I'm sorry, Brandy Blair, you also asked the same question. We can send out the, for the healthcare industry participants on today's call, you will receive the slides for today as well as the invite for tomorrow's HTI call. So please look for that for sure. And then I think Gohar had a question.
We have a question from Gohar Khan. Just give us a moment to unmute you. Gohar, can you hear us? Okay, go ahead, Gohar. You're unmuted.
Hi, Minya and the panel. Thank you for answering the first question, because the biggest concern that I have is we all are focusing on the parts, how to get the parts. What about logistics? But I think the question was answered, but I think we really need to take care when the parts come to us, how do we take care of our people? So thank you for addressing that, answering that question. But my second question is, that although we have confidentialities in place and we have non-declaration in place, but still as a Resilinc we are a family. So how can we share, because same question is going to the maybe same supplier from the same industry, from different people from different channels, and maybe they might not be able to address all these questions and answer to every single customer. So how can Resilinc share that information without disclosing confidentiality, or something that at least we know that this supplier is not responding to us, but yes, it has responded to somebody else and they are safe or not? That's my question.
Yeah, no, thank you, Gohar, for that. Hold on one second. Okay, I'll try again. There's a little bit of an echo now. I think it's gone. So yeah, that's a good question. That's a perfectly valid question as well. So I think, as many of you know, when we started Resilinc, our goal was to create the LinkedIn for supply chain, with the idea that suppliers should not get multiple requests asking for the same thing, and our customers should not each have to send out multiple requests. Have to send out and do the research and do all the work, each customer having to spend hours of time doing it. So a couple of things, Gohar, that Resilinc has done that help you in this situation. One is, when we notify our customers about any war room that has been created simultaneously, the suppliers in the region get pinged, and the system asks them to confirm, are you okay, yes or no, how long are you going to be impacted, etc. And what happens is, once the supplier confirms that they're okay or they're impacted, they have their responses shared with all of the customers that they have approved that data to be shared on our platform. So we do not break confidentiality. We absolutely share the supplier's response with the supplier's approved customers. So this is one of the ways that Resilinc helps ensure that the supplier doesn't field 50 phone calls from 50 customers, and with one response they can notify 50 customers at the same time through Resilinc right into your war room. The second thing that we have done, for those of you who may not be aware, is as soon as we published our original analysis on this, we also created the pandemic readiness assessment for suppliers. Many of our high-tech industry customers have already launched this assessment to their suppliers. The good news for the rest of you who may not have done this is, if your suppliers have filled this out for the original customers who launched it, they now have the option to share this data with you. So what we highly recommend is, if you're concerned about your suppliers in this area, you're looking for information from them, please leverage the Resilinc Pandemic Readiness Survey Library from the library and launch it to your suppliers, and then all the suppliers will get a request from you saying, hey, you've already shared this, can I see your responses? And now, without doing additional work, the supplier will be able to approve your access to their responses, and you'll be able to see it. So yes, Gohar, we completely agree with you that at this difficult time, the supplier is required to field a lot of questions from many customers. And by using the survey from the library, you can help make their workload less, as well as leveraging the Resilinc network to get the information you want.
Thank you, Bindya. Just on that, one question, it's just a follow-up question on that, much of the work is done offline. Maybe some of the suppliers, do not respond on Resilinc, and all of us are doing so many things away from Resilinc as well. So how do we share this information within the industry? Can we upload that information? Yes, my supplier is safe.
Do you wish to notify outside of your user groups? Maybe are you looking to notify your customers that your suppliers are okay?
No, what I'm asking is sharing the information. So maybe, some of the suppliers might not respond on Resilinc, but they are responding to category managers, or they're responding to procurements, different companies. So how do we share that information? Uploading somewhere that, yes, my supplier is safe. So at least, have it on the system.
Within the Resilinc war room, anytime, so there are two things we recommend doing. One is when a supplier does not respond in Resilinc, but responds directly to category managers, please go back to the supplier and ask them, hey, Resilinc is our system of record. This is the system that our worldwide team uses to get who's impacted and who's okay. Make sure it has the most accurate information. That's the first step we recommend all customers do. And when our customers who use this extensively do that, the supplier over time gets conditioned to respond in Resilinc and not try to skirt the process and do it offline. The second thing is, in case you do see that happening, let us know to contact the supplier and ask them to respond directly in our system. And the third is, internally, you can make sure that anytime you have a person who has responded directly to you, your users are able to go in and change their response in Resilinc to impacted or not impacted and save it. So at least for your internal user consumption, you can still maintain Resilinc as your system of record.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Bindya. Thank you, Gohar. Okay, we have another question that came in through the chat panel. How vulnerable is air freight transportation? Who would like to take that question?
So, well, this is Jared. Just to jump in, having experienced the Ebola crisis and seeing how quickly passenger travel has implications on cargo travel, the news coming out this morning already about airlines canceling flights for extended periods obviously then has an impact on some of the cargo capacity. So I think we're already starting to see some disruptions in that market, which will make things more complicated. So yeah, I think it remains to be seen, but as the Foreign Travel Office in the UK issues a warning, then British Airways follows with appropriate utilization of their resources and their assets according to likely passenger travel. This has a ripple effect on cargo capacity as well. And then your charter markets start going crazy, and there's a cascading impact on this. So I would say that it's looking like we're at the beginning of a very dynamic market at best. So yeah, the answer is, I guess the short answer is yes, it looks like it's going to be disrupted already, and how it plays out is to be determined.
Thank you, Jared. We have another question that came in. How can we engage with the federal government now to better be prepared for the virus spreading more broadly in the U.S.?
Jared, do you or Kathy, would you like to take this one?
I think this, in some ways, depends on the sector you're in. Again, they're coordinating more directly with any companies in and related to the medical sector to support the public health interventions most effectively. So that's a different kind of relationship. And in general, these kinds of situations are still somewhat new. We're used to different kinds of emergencies with the federal government in terms of public-private coordination. And so it's not exactly clear how the broader engagement will happen, but we will continue to provide, be an outlet and working with Resilinc to get information out about those proper channels. I think that's the best answer I can give now. I don't know, Kathy, if you have something to add your perspective on this.
Yeah, I'll just add that any type of crisis that ends up being managed through an emergency management perspective, your best source of information is always going to be your state emergency management group, many of whom have dedicated resources for private sector. DHS also has their protective security advisors. So there are a variety of ways. If there's, a specific location or a specific industry, we're happy to be that conduit to connect that organization.
And if I could just add one thing here, for those of you who don't track the public policy making on these issues, it is important to note that in general, DHS and FEMA have been really leaning forward to engage the private sector in all kinds of emergencies. And so this is a particularly good time to start understanding more about how you can connect at the state and local level, but also the new mechanisms that the federal government is trying to put in place to make this collaboration more easy going forward. And so, we'll be glad to help provide information about how that positioning the government is taking is definitely conducive to companies understanding their supply chain and the supply chains of others and how to best coordinate in an emergency situation.
I have one more thing to add, particularly for life science, medical device, and healthcare sectors. So we did have a conversation with the FDA 2 days ago about this, and they have their office that tracks any kind of materials that are on short supply or going on allocations and things like that, and they definitely want to be kept in the loop. So we did have a couple of names from them as to who to notify. Obviously, we do not break any client confidentiality, so we just want to let our customers know that should you wish to know who to notify at the FDA, please do let us know how we could help. At least we can give you a starting point. Now, I do have one question for the audience. This call has a lot of Resilinc's clients. So let us know what more we can do, whether you speak up in the next few minutes or let us know offline how else we can help or be of assistance to you in this time. In addition to this call today, like I said on the call tomorrow we'll have a more general call. We have actually 2 calls scheduled. One is a similar call to what we did today, open to the non-customer community of Resilinc. So if you have people who might have missed today's session but you felt was valuable for them to attend, please do send them tomorrow at 9 a.m. We have that session, and then at 10:30 it's for the Healthcare Transparency Initiative. So anyone want to chime in with any additional feedback for Resilinc on what more we could do? And keep in mind we have all our customers today on this call, so be nice, guys. Anyone want to go first? Okay, if you can't be nice, don't hold back. Go for it. Anyone? I think there was one final comment from Mark. One question from Harry. Yes, we will be sending out updated decks about every 2 to 3 days regarding any new things that might happen on the coronavirus situation. And there was an additional comment from Mark about the Chinese airport or port disruptions. So I think, Mark, we need to make sure that in your environment, we load all the ports and airports that you typically use. And then once those ports and airports that you use are loaded, then you would be able to see all the disruptions at those ports and airports in Resilinc's war room. So I think that with that, we can probably go back to Sophia. Go ahead, Sophia.
Okay. With that being said, I think we can wrap this up. Are there any final statements from Jared or Kathy?
I just want to say thank you, Resilinc, for first of all, convening this community of supply chain professionals who think about resilience and are looking ahead at how to make sure their supply chains continue to perform and deliver important goods to our society at these times, and the opportunity to start introducing the way that the public sector can be another resource in this. And we look forward to continuing this kind of collaboration going forward.
Thank you, Jared. Thank you, Kathy, Jared, for your time today, and thank you all for attending and for participating and asking lots of questions. Appreciate the collaborative nature. Look forward to hearing from you offline about how else we can help you guys. Best of luck, and have a nice day. Thank you all.
Thank you, everyone.